Chapter 1 Introduction. This is the story of Princess Clara. Clara lives in a magical castle, the Castle of Mirrors, a place filled with endless reflections, magical animals, endless mysteries, and most importantly, endless secrets. Now, you might think living in a magical castle sounds amazing, right? But not for Clara. Because here's the thing, she's stuck. Trapped, actually. All thanks to her not-so-charming aunt, Queen Helena. Far away, Queen Helena sat on her dark throne, her icy beauty cold and commanding. She gazed into a shadowy mirror that displayed Clara's glowing reflection. Helena is as vain as they come, obsessed with power, beauty, and control. And Clara? Well, Clara was born with magic, a kind of magic that Helena fears more than anything. So she did what any evil queen would do. She locked Clara away in a castle filled with mirrors. Mirrors that show the world Clara can never be a part of. Harsh, right? Back in the castle, Clara gazed wistfully into the mirror, longing flickering in her emerald green eyes. Her reflection shimmered with dreams of freedom, the images of the outside world pulling at her heart. But this story isn't just about Clara. There's someone else. Someone whose life is about to collide with hers in the most unexpected way. Jack, a roguishly charming thief. He's clever, quick on his feet, and okay, maybe not the most honest guy in the kingdom. He's got a good heart somewhere under all that swagger. And believe it or not, fate's about to bring Jack and Clara together in a way neither of them could have imagined. Clara's fingers pressed against the glowing surface of her mirror, the images of freedom pulling at her soul. Jack leaped over a cart of apples, slipping into the cover of a shadowy forest, just as the castle's mirrors shimmered with new energy. Though worlds apart, their destinies were now on a collision course. What happens when a daring thief stumbles into a magical castle? Well, let's just say this story is about to get a whole lot more interesting. Buckle up, because this is the tale of a princess, a thief, and a destiny that shines brighter than any reflection. Chapter 2 The Castle of Mirrors. The air in the Castle of Mirrors was always cool, faintly scented with lavender and magic. Moonlight filtered through the tall, arched windows, reflecting endlessly across the polished walls and ornate mirrors lining the grand hallways. These mirrors were unlike any other. Some rippled like water, alive with flickering images of strange lands and mystical beings, while others remained opaque, hiding secrets too dangerous to reveal. The heart of this enigmatic castle lived Princess Clara. She was 16, her chestnut hair falling in soft waves around a delicate face marked by curiosity and quiet strength. Her emerald eyes often gazed wistfully at the largest mirror in her chamber, a mirror that showed her the world beyond the castle's walls. Displayed rolling green fields, bustling villages, and vibrant skies, all so tantalizingly close and yet completely out of reach. Clara lived a life of isolation, her only companions the magical animals conjured by the mirrors. A mischievous fox named Fenric often leapt through the reflective surfaces to keep her company, while a tiny bluebird named Lyric perched on her shoulder, singing soft melodies to ease her loneliness. Yet even their playful antics couldn't quiet the longing in her heart. "Why must I stay here?" Clara whispered to the mirror one evening, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of magic that filled the room. "Why can't I step through and join the world out there?" A shadow shifted behind her, and the air grew colder. Vespera, the castle's guardian spirit, emerged silently from the darkness. Her form was ethereal, her translucent robe shimmering like moonlight on water. Her eyes, deep and ancient, held both wisdom and sorrow. "The world beyond these walls is fraught with danger," Vespera said, her voice like a sigh carried on the wind. "Your power is both a gift and a curse, Clara. There are those who would seek to harm you, to use you. Here you are safe." Clara turned to face her, frustration flickering in her eyes. "Safe? Or imprisoned? I feel like a bird in a gilded cage." Vespera's expression softened, but her tone remained firm. "Your safety is my duty, child. You must trust me. The outside world is not what it seems." As Vespera glided away, disappearing into the shadows, Clara clenched her fists. Her heart ached with a yearning she could no longer suppress. The mirrors mocked her with their glimpses of freedom, and she resolved that one day she would find a way to step through them, to leave the castle and discover the truth for herself. Far away in the kingdom beyond the castle of mirrors, Queen Helena sat on her obsidian throne, her beauty as cold and flawless as carved ice. Her raven-black hair framed a face devoid of warmth, and her piercing blue eyes glinted with cruelty. She was the architect of Clara's imprisonment, driven by a relentless fear of losing her throne. Years ago, Helena had dreamt of a child with a light so radiant it threatened to consume her darkness. That child was Clara. Helena acted swiftly, murdering her younger sister, Clara's mother, and locking the infant princess away in the castle of mirrors. To ensure Clara would never rise to challenge her, Helena cast a powerful enchantment over the mirrors, binding Vespera to guard the castle and keep the girl from escaping. "Your time will never come," Helena murmured, her voice dripping with venom. She gazed into a mirror, a dark twin of the ones in Clara's castle, and saw the girl's reflection, glowing with an innocence and strength that made her blood boil. "You will remain hidden forever." The next morning, Clara wandered through the castle's maze-like halls, her footsteps echoing softly against the marble floors. Rays of morning light filtered through high-arched windows, casting shifting patterns on the reflective walls. Each turn brought her face to face with another mirror, some dull and dusty, others alive with vibrant scenes that whispered of far-off lands. She paused before one that shimmered with a tranquil forest, the kind she had only read about in the tattered books hidden away in the castle library. The image seemed to breathe, the leaves of the towering trees swaying gently in an unseen breeze. A family of deer grazed beneath the emerald canopy, their movements so lifelike Clara almost expected to hear the crunch of grass beneath their hooves. She leaned closer, her breath fogging the glass as she reached out, her fingertips hovering just above the surface. "Do you ever wonder what it's like?" she asked Fenric, who padded silently at her side, his silver fur catching the dappled light. "To walk in a real forest? To feel the sun warming your skin, hear birdsong that isn't a memory trapped in glass?" Her voice was soft, wistful, carrying the weight of her years of isolation. Fenric tilted his head, his amber eyes catching the mirror's light. "The mirrors show many things," he replied, his tone calm yet tinged with a quiet wisdom. "But they are only fragments, echoes of what is real. They can't replace the world beyond." Clara smiled faintly, though her heart ached. "Even you think I should leave, don't you?" she asked, glancing down at him. The fox's ears twitched, his gaze thoughtful but unreadable. He didn't answer, his silence carrying an unspoken truth that settled heavily on Clara's shoulders. She turned back to the mirror, her reflection barely visible against the vivid scene. The deer lifted their heads as if sensing her gaze before bounding gracefully into the depths of the imagined forest. The loss of their presence felt strangely hollow. "I wonder if the real world would even want me," she murmured, more to herself than to Fenric. "I've been hidden for so long. What if I don't belong out there?" Clara nodded, her resolve solidifying. The void in the mirror seemed to pulse, the hum of magic surrounding her like an unspoken invitation. For the first time, she felt as though the castle, with all its mysteries, was showing her a path forward, a path she could no longer ignore. Chapter 3: A Thief in Trouble. Jack, a young and cunning thief, sprinted through the twisting corridors of the royal castle, his prize a glittering crown tucked safely under his arm. The echoing shouts of guards followed close behind, their footsteps a relentless drumbeat of pursuit. Jack's heart raced, but he wore a crooked grin. He lived for moments like this, where every second teetered on the edge of disaster. "You'll never catch me," Jack muttered under his breath, darting down another shadowy hallway. His keen eyes searched for an escape route, and just ahead, he spotted an ajar door leading into darkness. Without hesitation, he plunged through it, slamming the door behind him. His breath came in short, sharp gasps as he leaned against the cold stone wall, listening to the muffled voices of the guards outside. The room was eerily quiet. Jack took a moment to glance around, his grin fading as the dim light revealed an unsettling sight. Mirrors. Hundreds of them. Tall and ornate, they lined the walls, their polished surfaces reflecting endless corridors that seemed to stretch into infinity. The air felt heavy, almost alive, as if the room were aware of his presence. "Well, this isn't creepy at all," Jack whispered, stepping cautiously forward. His reflection stared back at him from every angle, 100 Jacks smirking nervously in unison. As he moved deeper into the room, the mirrors began to ripple, their surfaces shimmering like disturbed water. Jack froze, clutching the crown tighter. One of the mirrors suddenly flared to life, projecting an image of Jack wearing the very crown he had stolen. Except in this vision, he was seated on a gilded throne, draped in royal robes and looking far more regal than he felt. Jack snorted. "Well, that's wishful thinking," he muttered, brushing off the image and continuing forward. The ripples in the mirrors grew more pronounced, and Jack realized with a start that the room was shifting. The walls seemed to stretch and curve, creating new paths and sealing off old ones. It was as if the castle itself were alive, reshaping its labyrinth to trap him. Jack's confidence wavered, but his instincts kicked in. He had navigated his way out of tight spots before. This would be no different. Behind him, the sound of the door bursting open shattered the silence. The guards had found his trail. Jack ducked into the nearest corridor, narrowly avoiding the beam of a lantern. Castle's twisting hallways worked to his advantage, confounding his pursuers as much as they confused him. Still, the mirrors seemed to taunt him, reflecting not only his own image but distorted visions of the guards closing in. One mirror caught his eye as he passed, its surface glowing faintly. It showed a path ahead that wasn't visible to the naked eye, a hidden corridor veiled in shadow. Jack hesitated for only a moment before trusting the vision. He darted toward the concealed passage, ducking through a narrow gap just as the guards rounded the corner. Their frustrated shouts faded into the distance as Jack descended a winding staircase lit by an otherworldly blue glow. The staircase ended in a cavernous hall unlike anything Jack had ever seen. The walls shimmered with mirror-like surfaces that reflected not only the room but strange, fragmented scenes of other places. A verdant forest, a storm-tossed sea, a bustling market square, all glimpses of worlds that seemed incredibly real yet impossibly distant. Jack approached one of the mirrors, his hand hovering inches from its surface. The glass seemed to hum with energy, drawing him in. "What kind of place is this?" Jack murmured, his voice swallowed by the vast silence. The hall was both awe-inspiring and unnerving, its beauty marred by the creeping sense that he wasn't alone. His suspicions were confirmed when he caught movement in one of the mirrors. A shadowy figure, indistinct but undeniably watching him. Jack spun around, but the hall was empty. "Get it together, Jack," he muttered, shaking his head. But the unease lingered, growing stronger with every step. As he moved further into the hall, the mirrors seemed to grow more erratic. Some reflected him perfectly, while others distorted his image unnaturally. One mirror showed him as a child, clutching a wooden toy sword and grinning with unbridled mischief. Another showed him older, battle-worn and weary, with eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 mistakes. Jack looked away quickly, his grip tightening on the crown. The hall seemed endless, but Jack's determination never wavered. He knew the guards wouldn't give up easily, and he couldn't afford to lose himself in this maze of reflections. Yet the mirrors themselves seemed to conspire against him, their shifting surfaces creating illusions that led him in circles. Frustration boiled over as he slammed a hand against one of the mirrors. To his shock, the glass rippled like water and his hand sank through. Startled, Jack pulled his hand back, staring at the now placid mirror. He glanced around, half expecting someone to leap out at him, but the hall remained eerily still. Curiosity won out over caution, and Jack carefully pressed his hand to the glass again. This time, he pushed through, stepping into a world that was both familiar and magical. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the ground beneath his feet was soft with moss. He was in a forest, but the sky above was a swirling mosaic of colors like the surface of an oil painting. The realization struck him that he had stepped into another dimension, one of the many worlds glimpsed through the mirrors. Jack didn't have long to marvel at his discovery. A low growl echoed through the trees, and he turned to see a pair of glowing eyes watching him from the shadows. Then another. And another. Jack's heart sank as a pack of wolves emerged, their fur bristling and their teeth bared. "Fantastic," Jack muttered, backing away slowly. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. The wolves advanced, their growls growing louder. Jack tightened his grip on the crown, ready to use it as a makeshift weapon if necessary. But before he could act, a shimmering portal opened behind him, its edges crackling with energy. Without thinking, Jack dove through, the wolves' snarls cut off as the portal snapped shut. He landed back in the mirrored hall, the crown skidding across the floor. For a moment he lay there, catching his breath. The mirrors seemed to pulse faintly, almost as if they were laughing at him. Jack couldn't help but chuckle himself, shaking his head. "You've got a weird sense of humor, Castle," he said, pushing himself to his feet. The sound of footsteps reminded him that his reprieve was short-lived. The guards were close, their voices growing louder with every passing second. Jack scooped up the crown and bolted, his path illuminated by the faint glow of the mirrors, drawing both himself and the pursuing guards deeper into this strange, enchanted realm. He didn't know where he was going, but one thing was certain: this castle was more than it seemed, and escaping it would be the greatest challenge he had ever faced. As he disappeared into the twisting corridors, the mirrors rippled one last time, their surfaces reflecting not just Jack's fleeing figure but something far more sinister watching from the depths. Castle, it seemed, had plans of its own. Chapter 4: The Unexpected Meeting. Jack took a cautious step forward, the faint glow of the mirrored walls around him casting an ethereal light. He had navigated treacherous escapes before, but nothing had prepared him for the enigma that was the Castle of Mirrors. The air seemed to hum with energy, and each mirror he passed offered glimpses of worlds unknown. Some showed landscapes bathed in sunlight, others swirled with shadows and menace. Jack's focus, however, was fixed on one objective: finding a way out. Ahead, the corridor twisted into a grand chamber. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, with light filtering through no apparent source, illuminating every polished surface. Jack paused, his instincts alert to the unusual stillness of the space. The silence was soon broken by a soft rustling sound, like the swish of fabric brushing against stone. His sharp eyes darted to the center of the chamber, where a figure stood partially obscured by the light reflecting off a tall mirror. Clara had heard the faint sound of footsteps before she saw him. Her heart raced as she pressed herself against the cool surface of the mirror behind her, her pale hands trembling slightly. It had been years since she had seen another human, and now, out of nowhere, this stranger had appeared in her world. The figure came closer, and Clara's wide eyes took in his disheveled clothes, the stolen crown tucked under one arm, and the look of cautious determination on his face. She felt equal parts fear and curiosity. Jack noticed the movement and froze. His hand instinctively moved toward his belt, though no weapon was there, just the confidence that he could talk or trick his way out of most situations. "Who's there?" he called, his voice firm but tinged with a self-deprecating edge. "If you're dangerous, I'm just passing through. If not, maybe we can talk about how confusing this place is." Clara hesitated before stepping forward, the shimmering light around her casting an almost otherworldly glow on her delicate features. Jack blinked, momentarily stunned. She looked like someone out of a legend, with her flowing gown and the air of quiet sadness that seemed to envelop her. "I could ask you the same thing," Clara replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. Her gaze flickered to the crown in Jack's arm. "You don't look like you belong here." Jack relaxed slightly, sensing no immediate threat. He straightened, his easy grin returning. "Well, I could say the same about you," he countered. Then, with a dramatic bow, he added, "I am Sir Jack the Brave, rescuer of damsels, finder of treasures, and general hero of the hour." Clara raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Sir Jack the Brave? That sounds questionable. Jack's grin widened. Questionable, maybe, but effective. And who might you be, O mysterious lady of the mirrors? He gave a playful spin, pretending to dramatically brandish an invisible sword, only to lose his balance slightly and catch himself. See? Hero material. Clara, she said simply, studying him. She didn't trust this stranger, not yet, but there was something about his humor that disarmed her, even if she wouldn't admit it. What are you doing here? Jack hesitated for the briefest of moments. The truth that he was a thief running from guards might not go over well. Instead, he opted for a version of the truth, laced with charm. I came to find you, he said, meeting her eyes. To rescue you from this place. He gestured vaguely at the mirrored walls around them. Clara's skepticism deepened. You came to rescue me? You don't even know who I am. Jack shrugged. I didn't need to. I heard there was a princess trapped in a magical castle, and I thought to myself, Jack, you can't pass up a chance to do something heroic. Clara crossed her arms, but the corner of her mouth twitched upward, betraying a hint of amusement. Heroic? Right. And the crown? Jack glanced at the crown as if noticing it for the first time. Oh, this? Just a souvenir. Every great adventure needs a keepsake. Jack paused thoughtfully, then added, You know, I might start a collection. Crowns are in this season, right? Despite herself, Clara let out a soft laugh, quickly covering her mouth. It was the first genuine laugh she had allowed herself in years, and it surprised her. She studied Jack more closely. There was something about him, his audacity, his wit, his refusal to take anything too seriously, that made her feel a flicker of hope, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Jack, for his part, was intrigued by Clara. She wasn't like anyone he had met before. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience that he admired. And yet she seemed fragile, as though years of isolation had left invisible cracks. He felt an unfamiliar urge to protect her, though he couldn't quite explain why. So, Clara said, breaking the silence, you're here to rescue me. Do you even know how to get out of this castle? Jack's grin faltered for a split second before returning. Of course I do, he said with mock confidence. Step 1, find the exit. Step 2, walk through it. Easy. Clara shook her head, but the small smile lingered. You don't have a clue, do you? Not a one, Jack admitted, his grin turning sheepish. But I've made it this far, haven't I? Clara sighed, glancing at the mirrors around them. She had dreamed of leaving the castle for as long as she could remember, but Vesper's warnings had always held her back. Now, with Jack here, she felt a spark of courage she hadn't known she possessed. Maybe this stranger was reckless and unpredictable, but he was also the first person who had ever offered her a way out. Fine, Clara said at last. We'll work together. But I'm warning you, if you're lying about why you're here, I'll find out. Lying? Me? Never, Jack replied, feigning mock outrage. Well, maybe occasionally. But not to you, Princess. Promise. Jack held up his hands in mock surrender. Scout's honor. Were you even a scout? Nope, Jack admitted cheerfully. But I've got a good heart. You'll see. The two began to move cautiously through the chamber, their reflections following them at every turn. The mirrors seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the castle itself was watching their every move. Jack kept up a steady stream of chatter, partly to fill the silence and partly to distract Clara from her lingering doubts. So, what do you do for fun around here? He asked. Clara gave him a look. Fun? In this place? Come on, Jack pressed. You must have something. A hobby? A secret passageway you've been dying to explore. Clara hesitated. I used to sing, she said softly. Before everything. Jack's tone shifted, becoming more earnest. Sing? That's great. You'll have to sing for me sometime. Maybe we'll form a band once we're out of here. You sing, I'll play, something. Maybe maracas? Maybe, Clara said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. But the idea of singing again, of reclaiming a piece of herself, planted a seed of hope. As they navigated the mirrored halls, the bond between them began to grow. Clara's initial wariness softened, and Jack found himself genuinely wanting to help her. Together, they pushed forward, unaware of the challenges that awaited them. For the first time in years, Clara felt like she wasn't alone, and Jack began to see that there was more to life than treasure and escape. Their journey had only just begun, but already they had found something invaluable in each other. Chapter 5: Through the Mirror Worlds. Jack and Clara stepped cautiously through the threshold of the mirror, finding themselves in a strange new dimension. The air shimmered, thick with a surreal haze that made the edges of the world ripple like water. This was the first of the mirror dimensions, and it wasted no time in showing them its challenges. The ground beneath them glowed faintly, reflecting their movements as if it were a liquid mirror. Clara instinctively took a step back as a reflection of herself rose from the ground, mimicking her every move with an eerie accuracy. Jack's reflection joined hers, but unlike Clara's serene and curious gaze, Jack's duplicate smirked mischievously and immediately started mockingly copying him. "Well, this is unsettling," Jack muttered, narrowing his eyes at his reflection. "Couldn't it at least be more handsome?" The reflection mimicked his words, twisting them into a mocking tone. Jack lunged forward, trying to grab it, but his hands passed through it like smoke. Clara's duplicate mirrored her every movement perfectly, even as she raised her hands cautiously to test the boundaries of this bizarre phenomenon. "Clara," Jack said, stepping back toward her, "I think these reflections want us to leave. Any bright ideas?" Clara furrowed her brow, focusing. Her hands began to glow faintly, a soft light emanating from her fingertips. As she moved, the reflections faltered, their forms rippling and distorting. She drew an arc of light in the air, and the reflections recoiled, their shapes twisting unnaturally before dissolving into the ground. "That works," Jack said with a low whistle. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." They pressed onward, the world shifting as they moved. The next dimension was a whirlwind of chaos. A swirling vortex of wind surrounded them, lifting leaves and fragments of the mirrored ground into a swirling cyclone. Clara's hair whipped around her face as she held tightly to Jack's arm. "What now?" Jack shouted over the roaring wind. He dug his heels into the ground, but it felt like they were being pulled toward the eye of the storm. Clara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to center herself. Her magic began to hum faintly, resonating with the rhythm of the wind. She opened her mouth and sang a soft, haunting melody. The sound cut through the chaos, each note harmonizing with the storm. The vortex began to slow, its furious motion calming until it dissipated into a gentle breeze. "Impressive," Jack said, catching his breath. "And here I thought I'd have to throw you into the storm as a distraction." Clara shot him a look, but a small smile tugged at her lips. "Next time you can sing to the wind." Just as the calm returned, the sound of distant footsteps echoed behind them. Jack and Clara turned sharply. Emerging from a shimmering portal, the castle guards stormed into the dimension, their armor clanking loudly. Their leader shouted, "Don't let them escape!" Clara's eyes widened. "They're coming after us?" But how did they? "Save the questions for later, Princess." Jack grabbed Clara's hand. "Looks like the fun isn't over yet. Run!" Pair darted through the dimension, dodging falling debris and distorted reflections. The guards closed in, their swords gleaming in the mirrored light. Clara, breathless, glanced back. "They're gaining on us." "Not for long," Jack said, pulling her toward a narrow corridor. "Stay close." They twisted and turned through the maze-like pathways, the guards' footsteps pounding closer. Jack stopped abruptly, spotting a fragile-looking mirror in their path. He smirked and gave Clara a mischievous look. "Cover your ears." Before she could protest, He hurled a heavy shard of glass at the mirror. It shattered with a deafening crash, sending waves of light cascading through the dimension. The shockwave knocked the guards off their feet, buying Jack and Clara precious seconds. "That'll slow them down," Jack said, pulling Clara forward. "Come on!" They reached the next portal just as the guards began to recover, their shouts echoing behind them. Jack and Clara leapt through, tumbling into the next dimension. The third dimension was a stark contrast to the chaos they'd just faced. It was silent, eerily so. The ground was a pale fog, and the mirrors around them reflected scenes that were strangely familiar. Jack walked closer to one, his breath catching in his throat as he saw himself as a boy stealing bread from a market stall. The reflection froze, and then the younger Jack turned to look at him, eyes filled with guilt and fear. "Don't look," Clara's voice came softly. She stood near another mirror, her reflection showing a younger version of herself sitting alone in a grand, empty room. Tears streamed down the girl's face as she stared at the mirror, her lips moving silently. "They're just tricks," Clara said, though her voice wavered. "They're meant to make us doubt ourselves." Jack turned away from the mirror, stepping toward Clara. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he said firmly. "And we're getting out of here. Together." Clara nodded, drawing strength from his words. She summoned small orbs of light, their glow piercing through the fog. As the lights grew brighter, the haunting reflections faded, and the path ahead became clear. Their final trial brought them to a vast, desert-like dimension. The sand shimmered like glass, and the oppressive heat made the air waver. Clara stumbled, exhaustion beginning to take its toll. "This place feels endless," she said, shielding her eyes from the glare. "Not if we smash the mirrors," Jack said, brandishing a shard of broken glass he'd picked up along the way. He turned toward the nearest mirror and struck it with all his might. The glass shattered, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. The dimension began to tremble, the sand swirling around them as if the world were coming apart. "Run!" Jack shouted, grabbing Clara's hand. They sprinted across the shifting sands, the shattered mirror's energy collapsing the dimension behind them. They dove through the final mirror, tumbling onto solid ground. When they finally looked up, they found themselves in a tranquil forest. The mirrored halls and chaotic dimensions were gone, replaced by towering trees bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying the earthy scent of moss and blooming flowers. For the first time in what felt like hours, they could breathe freely. Jack, ever the opportunist, spotted a clearing surrounded by trees that seemed to form a protective circle. In the center, a small patch of wildflowers and flat stones provided the perfect spot for a campfire. "Not exactly five-star accommodations," he said with a smirk, dropping a bundle of kindling he'd gathered along the way, "but I'd say it's got charm." Clara knelt beside the pile of wood, her delicate fingers brushing against the rough bark. She closed her eyes and murmured softly, her voice carrying an almost melodic hum. A soft glow began to emanate from her hands, and within seconds the kindling caught fire. The flames danced in hues of gold and blue, casting a warm, ethereal light across their faces. Jack watched in quiet amazement, his usual witty remarks momentarily silenced. "You know," he said after a pause, his voice softer than usual, "I could really get used to traveling with someone who can light a fire with magic. Beats flint and steel any day." Clara laughed lightly, though there was a wistfulness to it. "It's not much," she said, staring into the flames. "Just a small trick I learned while I was alone. The mirrors, they used to show me things, other people, other worlds. But none of it was real. This is real." Jack leaned back, resting on his elbows as he looked up at the canopy of trees. The stars peeked through, their light twinkling like diamonds. "Real is overrated," he said, though his tone was playful. "I mean, look at us. A wandering traveler and a princess sitting around a magical fire in the middle of an enchanted forest. You can't write this stuff." Clara turned to him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the flames. "You're more than just a traveler, Jack," she said quietly. "I've seen how you look out for me, how you make me laugh even when things feel hopeless." "You're kind." Jack's usual smirk faltered. He sat up, his expression uncharacteristically earnest. "And you're more than a princess," he replied. "You're brave, Clara. Braver than anyone I've ever met. You don't let fear stop you. You make me want to be better." The two fell into a comfortable silence, the crackling of the fire filling the space between them. Clara absently traced patterns in the dirt with her finger, while Jack poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers rise like tiny fireflies. It was a rare, quiet moment amidst the chaos of their journey, a fragile bubble of peace that neither wanted to burst. Finally, Clara broke the silence. Chapter 6: The Blooming Battle. As Clara and Jack stepped through the next shimmering portal, they were instantly engulfed by a vibrant green light. When the light faded, they found themselves surrounded by towering blades of grass, massive blooming flowers, and sprawling trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. They realized something was strange when even the smallest flower seemed to tower over them. Looking at their hands and feet, they gasped simultaneously. "We're tiny," Jack exclaimed, his voice a mix of shock and humor. He attempted to brush a normal-sized leaf from his shoulder but stumbled under its surprising weight. "Do you think this is the castle's idea of a joke?" Clara, brushing pollen from her hair, couldn't help but smile. "I don't think the castle has much of a sense of humor. But it's beautiful, isn't it?" Her gaze drifted upward to the glowing canopy of leaves and sunlight filtering through in sparkling rays. Everything around them looked enchanting yet surreal, a world they had never seen from this perspective. Jack looked around, his initial disbelief giving way to amazement. "Beautiful, sure. But do you know how hard it's going to be to find snacks at this size?" he quipped, earning a laugh from Clara. Before Jack could continue his humorous complaints, the ground beneath them rustled, and out of the thick foliage emerged a group of small yet fierce warriors. Dressed in armor made of petals and bark, they held spears fashioned from thorns and glared at the intruders. One of them, a leader clad in shimmering green beetle shell armor, stepped forward. "Princess Clara?" he asked, his voice both wary and hopeful. Clara's eyes widened. "You know me?" The warrior, introducing himself as Alder, bowed deeply. "We've been waiting for your return. The stories of your family's light are passed down through our generations. Welcome back to the Blooming Grove." Jack tilted his head, clearly unimpressed. "Nice to know someone rolled out the red carpet." The village of the Blooming Grove was a dazzling sight. Tiny homes built into mushrooms and trees glowed with soft luminescence. Winged creatures flitted through the air, and the entire village pulsed with a serene, magical energy. The villagers greeted Clara with awe and affection, showering her with garlands of glowing flowers. Jack, though less enthusiastically received, found himself surprisingly charmed by their hospitality. As the evening wore on, Clara and Jack were invited to join the villagers in a festival to honor the forest's light. Clara danced with children under lanterns made of fireflies, their laughter mingling with the melodic hum of crickets. Jack, reluctant at first, found himself drawn into a storytelling circle where the villagers shared tales of their ancestors and the hope Clara's family had brought them. "So, you're a princess and a savior?" Jack teased as he sat beside her near a bubbling brook. "No pressure or anything." Clara smiled, her gaze softening. "They've been through so much, Jack. If I can give them hope, it's worth it." Jack's usual smirk faded, replaced by something earnest. "You already do. Not just for them." Clara blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. Before she could reply, a soft glow surrounded them as fireflies began to gather, their gentle light illuminating the forest. "This place feels alive," Clara said, breaking the silence. "Like it's been waiting for us." Jack chuckled. "Then we'd better not let it down." Their moment of peace was interrupted by a distant, shrill screech that sent the fireflies scattering. The tranquil glow of the village dimmed as a shadow loomed over the trees. Suddenly, the harmony of the grove was shattered. A massive black bird swooped down, its wings beating with ominous force. On its back rode Vri, the self-proclaimed Shadow Lord of the Grove. Small like the villagers but exuding menace, Vria's jagged armor and crimson eyes made him a terrifying sight. Alongside him flew an army of beetle-mounted warriors, each adorned in jagged, dark armor. They descended swiftly, causing chaos to erupt in the village. "The Lightbringer returns," Vri sneered, his voice rasping like dry leaves. His piercing eyes locked onto Clara. "The Lightbringer returns," he repeated, "and with her the crystal, the heart of this grove's power. With it I will ensure my shadow reigns over all dimensions. Your light will extinguish, Princess, and your crystal will fuel my dominion. The grove's magic has resisted me for too long. But now both you and the crystal belong to me." The villagers tried to form a defensive line, but Vria's forces overwhelmed them with sheer numbers. The Shadow Lord's blackbird descended, its talons grasping both Clara and the grove's sacred crystal stone. Jack lunged forward, his hand outstretched, but he missed by inches. "Jack!" Clara cried out, her voice growing fainter as Vria's bird soared into the darkened sky. Alder rallied his warriors quickly, his voice firm. "To the sky mounts! We cannot let him escape." Jack, his expression grim, nodded. "Let's move." Moments later, Jack and the Blooming Grove warriors mounted their own fleet of majestic birds, their wings glimmering in the dim light. Jack chose a proud falcon with golden feathers, his grip firm on the reins. As they took flight, the forest transformed into a vast aerial battlefield, the tranquil beauty replaced with chaos and urgency. The chase that ensued was breathtakingly intense. Vria's forces, riding gliders fashioned from beetle wings, clashed with the villagers in midair. Jack steered his falcon through dense canopies, dodging swarms of insects and narrowly avoiding branches. Around him, the sounds of battle raged. The clash of weapons, the cries of warriors, and the screeches of birds filled the air. "We're gaining on him!" Alder shouted as his sparrow darted past Jack's falcon. But Vri anticipated their moves. His bird dived sharply, leading Jack and the warriors into a trap. From the shadows of the forest canopy, a second wave of Vria's forces ambushed them. The sky filled with armored beetles and gliders, throwing the villagers into disarray. Jack fought valiantly, his falcon weaving skillfully through the chaos. He slashed at beetle-mounted attackers with a thorn-tipped sword provided by Alder. Despite their best efforts, Vri escaped with Clara and the crystal, disappearing into the dense forest below. Back in the village, Jack stood amidst the shaken warriors. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the falcon's reins. "We're not giving up. He has Clara and we're getting her back." Alder placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Then we go to the Shadow Lord's stronghold. Together." Their journey to Vria's hidden fortress was perilous, but Jack and the warriors pressed on. The final battle unfolded in the heart of Vria's lair, a dark, sprawling cavern lit by the eerie glow of stolen crystals. Jack faced Vri in an intense duel, their strikes echoing through the chamber. Clara, her magic reignited by the crystal's proximity, broke free from her bonds and joined the villagers in repelling Vria's army. The battle began as Jack faced Vri, the Shadow Lord's dagger gleaming with dark magic. Vri moved like a shadow, his strikes swift and precise, but Jack matched him with equal agility, blocking blows with his thorn-tipped sword. Vri taunted him, his voice dripping with malice. "Do you really think you can stop me? You're just a kid out of your depth." Jack smirked, dodging a vicious swipe. "Maybe, but I'm a kid who doesn't give up." The duel raged across the cavern, their movements sending echoes through the crystal-lit chamber. Vri summoned shadows to bind Jack, but Jack used the light reflected off the stolen crystals to weaken the magic, forcing the Shadow Lord to engage him directly. At one point, Vria's dagger grazed Jack's arm, sending a jolt of pain through him. "You're not enough to stop me," Vri hissed, pressing his advantage. But Jack's determination only burned brighter. Remembering Clara's trust in him, he feigned a stumble, drawing Vri in close. With a sudden, calculated strike, Jack disarmed the Shadow Lord, sending the dagger clattering to the ground. Vri lunged for it, but Jack delivered a powerful kick, knocking him backward. "This ends now," Jack said, his voice steady. With a final, precise blow, Jack struck Vria's chest plate, shattering the dark enchantment binding him to his army. The Shadow Lord screamed as the shadows recoiled, retreating into the cracks of the cavern. Vri stumbled and fell to his knees, his once commanding presence reduced to a flicker of darkness before he vanished into the shadows entirely. The villagers reclaimed the crystal and cheered as Clara, now free, embraced Jack. "You always seem to find a way," she said softly, gratitude shining in her eyes. Jack, his smirk returning, replied, "Can't let you have all the fun, princess." The grove's light was restored, and with it, the bond between Clara and Jack grew even stronger. Chapter 7: The Mirror Gatekeepers. As Clara and Jack stepped deeper into the mirror realm, they arrived at a magnificent, shimmering doorway crafted entirely of enchanted mirrors. The air around them pulsed with a quiet energy, and faint whispers echoed as if the castle itself were alive. Jack, ever the pragmatist, crossed his arms and eyed the glimmering entrance with skepticism. Another fancy trick from the castle mirror. "Great," he muttered. "I'm guessing it doesn't open to a nice, quiet library." Clara stepped closer, her hand brushing against the smooth surface of the mirrored door. "This feels different," she murmured. "It's like it's waiting for something or someone." As if in response, the mirrors rippled like water. The doorway swung open, revealing a grand chamber where 3 imposing figures stood, each seemingly sculpted from shards of the enchanted mirrors. Their forms glimmered with an ethereal light, and their voices echoed as one. "Welcome, travelers," they intoned, their tones both melodic and foreboding. "To pass, you must prove your worth in intellect, strength, and heart." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Of course. Why not throw in juggling while we're at it?" Clara shot him a look. "Jack, focus." The first gatekeeper, radiating a soft blue light, stepped forward. "The trial of intellect awaits," it said, gesturing to a section of the chamber where mirrors formed a maze-like structure. Within, shimmering illusions shifted, their forms indistinct and ever-changing. As they entered, the maze seemed to stretch infinitely. Reflections surrounded them, each showing slightly altered versions of themselves. Jack tapped one of the mirrors cautiously. "So, what's the trick?" "Find the exit without losing our minds." "Not quite," Clara said, her gaze sharpening. Words had appeared on a nearby mirror. "I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with wind." "What am I?" Jack scratched his head. "Sounds like a bad joke." "It's a riddle," Clara corrected, her tone patient. She thought for a moment before answering. "An echo." The mirror pulsed and the path ahead shifted, opening to another segment. Jack clapped his hands mockingly. "Great. 1 down. How many more brain teasers are we solving?" They encountered more riddles, each growing increasingly complex. At one point, Jack surprised Clara by solving one involving patterns and numbers. "See? I'm not just a pretty face," he said with a grin. Finally, they reached the end of the maze, where the blue-lit gatekeeper reappeared. "You have proven your intellect. Proceed." The second gatekeeper, emanating a fiery orange glow, stepped forward. Its voice was deeper, resonating with the weight of authority. "The trial of strength begins now." The room shifted, and they found themselves in a shadowy combat arena. Figures emerged from the darkness, their forms taking the shape of Jack's past foes. Bandits he had once outwitted, guards he had evaded. They all appeared, their features distorted and menacing. "Oh, fantastic," Jack muttered. "A reunion party." The figures attacked, their movements eerily coordinated. Jack engaged them, his agility and quick thinking keeping him one step ahead. But for every shadow he struck down, 2 more seemed to appear. "Jack, look out." Clara's voice rang out as she cast a shield of light to deflect a blow aimed at his back. Her magic bolstered his efforts, creating moments of respite amid the chaos. "Thanks, Princess," Jack said, flashing her a grin despite the sweat dripping down his face. Clara's magic weakened the shadows and Jack's strikes finished them. As the final foe fell, the orange-lit gatekeeper reappeared. "Your combined strength is undeniable. Proceed." The third and final gatekeeper stepped forward, its light a gentle gold. "The trial of reflection begins. Prepare yourselves." The chamber's walls began to ripple like liquid glass, and the floor beneath Clara and Jack transformed into a smooth, reflective surface. Suddenly, their reflections in the mirrors came to life, stepping out of the glass like living beings. These mirrored versions of Clara and Jack glowed faintly but moved with an unsettling independence. "What is this?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with unease. "You must face yourselves," the gatekeeper's voice echoed. "Only by understanding and embracing your true selves can you pass." The mirrored Clara stepped forward, her expression a mix of sorrow and accusation. "You think you're ready to lead?" she said, her tone sharp. "You couldn't even save your family. You're too afraid to fail." Clara recoiled, her breath catching. "That's not true," she whispered, but the reflection's words struck deep. Meanwhile, Jack's mirrored self smirked, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're just a liar, Jack. Coward who runs when things get tough. Why would Clara ever trust someone like you?" Jack's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "That's not who I am anymore." The reflections circled them, their words biting and relentless. Clara's magic flared, but every time she tried to strike her mirror image, the reflection dodged effortlessly. Jack lunged at his double, but his blows only hit air. "Fighting won't work," Clara said, her voice trembling. They're us." Jack paused, his breathing heavy. "So what do we do? Apologize to ourselves?" "No," Clara said, her voice steadier now. "We listen." She turned to her reflection, her gaze resolute. "You're right. I am afraid. I'm terrified I'll fail the people who depend on me. But that fear doesn't define me. It's what drives me to keep going." The mirrored Clara froze, her glowing form flickering. She nodded once before stepping back into the glass. Jack watched, swallowing hard. He faced his reflection, his smirk replaced with raw vulnerability. "Yeah, I was a liar. I've made mistakes, a lot of them. But I'm not that person anymore. Clara trusts me because I've earned it, and I'm not going to let her down." His mirrored self tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips before he too vanished into the mirror. The chamber glowed warmly as the golden gatekeeper reappeared. "You have faced your truths and embraced your flaws. This is the strength of reflection. Proceed." The mirrored doorway opened, revealing the path ahead. Clara and Jack stepped through, their bond stronger than ever, ready for the challenges that lay ahead. They stepped deeper into the forest, the air heavy with anticipation for the trials that still awaited them. Chapter 8: The King's Wrath, a Daring Escape. The deep forest was unlike any place Clara or Jack had ever encountered. Towering trees stretched endlessly into the sky, their leaves shimmering in hues of emerald and gold. The forest floor was soft and lush, blanketed with moss that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The air was alive with the hum of unseen creatures, and the occasional flicker of light revealed tiny, darting beings that might have been fairies. A faint, melodic hum seemed to echo through the air, as if the forest itself was singing a tune only it could understand. Clara walked cautiously, her fingers brushing the trunks of the ancient trees as if sensing their stories. Jack, however, approached the forest with his usual swagger, though his darting eyes betrayed his unease. "Well, this is cozy," he quipped, stepping over a gnarled root. "If cozy means potentially haunted." Clara chuckled softly. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I've never seen anything like it." Her eyes lingered on the glowing moss and the faint trails of light left by the darting creatures. Jack glanced at her and smiled. "Stick with me, princess. The world's full of surprises. Most of them aren't glowing, though, so count this one as a win." As they ventured deeper, the forest grew denser, and the whispers of the trees seemed to grow louder. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She paused, her senses on high alert. "Jack," she whispered, "we're not alone." Jack stopped mid-step, his hand instinctively going to the small knife he carried. His expression shifted from casual confidence to sharp focus. "You always know how to lighten the mood," he muttered. Before he could respond further, the forest erupted in movement. Camouflaged warriors emerged from the shadows, their faces painted with earthy colors and their weapons gleaming in the dim light. They moved with precision, encircling Jack and Clara in moments. Jack, with his instinct for trouble, lunged at the nearest warrior, catching him off guard. Two clashed briefly, Jack dodging strikes and using his agility to evade their attacks. Clara, watching in alarm, tried to summon her magic but found herself subdued by a warrior wielding a glowing staff that seemed to suppress her powers. Despite Jack's skill and determination, the sheer number of warriors overwhelmed him. He was wrestled to the ground, his knife kicked away and his hands tied tightly with enchanted vines. "Do as they say," Clara urged softly, her voice calm but laced with tension. Jack reluctantly stopped struggling, glaring at the warriors as they tightened his bonds. "See? We're the friendly kind," he said with a disarming grin that went completely unappreciated by their captors. Bound and under heavy guard, Jack and Clara were marched through the forest to a massive tree that rose high above the others. A fortress built into its branches loomed above them, its intricate wooden structures connected by rope bridges swaying in the breeze. The center of the Silvaris fortress sat King Arden, a towering figure with a commanding presence. His golden armor gleamed faintly, reflecting the dim light of the forest. His sharp eyes assessed Clara with keen interest as they were brought before him. "So, this is the girl with the magic," the king said, his voice cold and calculating. His gaze shifted to Jack, lingering briefly before dismissing him as unimportant. "And you," he sneered, "just another kid playing hero." "I prefer resourceful adventurer," Jack quipped, earning himself a sharp shove from one of the guards. "Your Majesty," Jack began, his voice smooth and confident. "Before you go through all the trouble of stealing her powers, there's something I think you should know." King Arden raised a skeptical brow, motioning for silence. "And what could a wily little adventurer like you possibly have to say that I'd care to hear?" Jack grinned, leaning in conspiratorially. "I happen to know the location of a treasure so powerful, so incredible, that it can make even your wildest ambitions pale in comparison. Whoever possesses it gains unimaginable power." King's interest was visibly piqued, his sharp gaze narrowing on Jack. The guards paused, awaiting their king's reaction. "Go on," Arden said, his voice cold but intrigued. "Oh, it's hidden deep within a maze of traps and challenges," Jack continued, his hands gesturing dramatically. "Only someone of true cunning and bravery could ever hope to retrieve it. But I'm sure a ruler as mighty as yourself would have no trouble." Clara shot Jack a look of alarm but held her tongue, recognizing the glint of strategy in his expression. The room was silent for a beat as Arden processed Jack's words. Then the king leaned back on his throne, his lips curling into a faint smile. "And this treasure," Arden said slowly, "where exactly is it?" Jack hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pointed vaguely into the distance. "Beyond the Serpent's Veil, past the River of Shadows. But you'd need someone who's seen the path, like me." King leaned forward, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed as though he might believe Jack. Then Arden threw back his head and laughed, the sound cold and cruel. "You think I'm a fool, boy?" he sneered. "A treasure beyond imagining, guided by a kid? Spare me your fairy tales." Jack feigned hurt, clutching his chest. "I'm offended, Your Highness. I only wanted to help you become the most powerful ruler in history." Arden rose from his throne, his imposing figure towering over them. Enough of this nonsense. Guards, take them away before I lose my patience entirely. Jack exchanged a quick glance with Clara as the guards moved to seize them. Well, can't say I didn't try, he muttered. Plan B it is. King's lips curled into a smirk. Your magic, he said, turning back to Clara, can strengthen my reign. I'll have it one way or another. He gestured to his guards. Take them to the prison. Keep them separated. I'll deal with the kid later. As for her, prepare the ritual. Clara's eyes widened with fear, but she kept her composure. As the guards dragged them away, Jack leaned toward her and whispered, Don't worry, princess. I've got a plan. Inside the tree fort prison, Jack paced furiously while Clara sat quietly, her brow furrowed in thought. This is why I don't do forests, Jack muttered. Too many people hiding in bushes. And these guys? Zero sense of humor. Clara smiled despite the situation. We'll find a way out, she said, her voice calm but determined. She closed her eyes, focusing on the connection she felt with the living forest around them. Slowly, the vines binding her hands began to loosen, glowing faintly as they responded to her silent command. The sensation was strange yet comforting, as if the forest itself was lending her its strength. Jack, she whispered, holding up her freed hands. He stopped pacing, his expression shifting from frustration to impressed disbelief. You're full of surprises, princess, he said, his grin returning. Working quickly, Clara freed Jack and then turned her attention to the wooden bars of their cell. Summoning her energy, she coaxed the vines woven into the bars to unwind, creating a small opening. Ladies first, Jack said with a mock bow, and Clara rolled her eyes as she slipped through the gap. Their escape was not unnoticed for long. As they crept along one of the swaying rope bridges, a guard's shout pierced the air. Chaos erupted as warriors swarmed toward them. Jack and Clara ran, the rope bridges bouncing wildly beneath their feet. At the edge of the fortress, they found a horse-drawn vehicle loaded with supplies. Jack grinned, grabbing the reins. Our ride awaits, he declared. Clara hesitated for only a moment before climbing aboard. The warriors closed in, but Jack snapped the reins and the vehicle lurched forward, careening down the winding paths of the forest. The chase that followed was nothing short of exhilarating. The vehicle barreled through the forest, its wheels skidding over moss and roots. Warriors pursued on foot and horseback, their shouts echoing through the trees. Jack steered with wild abandon, narrowly avoiding collisions with trees and boulders. Clara, seated beside him, used her magic to create flashes of light that disoriented their pursuers. One warrior leaped onto the back of the vehicle, his sword drawn. Jack reacted instantly, grabbing a loose plank of wood and engaging the warrior in a frantic struggle. Clara turned, her hands glowing as she summoned a burst of energy that sent the attacker flying into the underbrush. Nice teamwork, Jack shouted over the roar of the chase. Finally, the vehicle burst out of the dense forest onto a narrow path that led to the edge of the waterfall. The sound of rushing water grew deafening as the path ended abruptly. Jack pulled the reins, bringing the vehicle to a screeching halt. Clara looked at him, panic in her eyes. The sound of shouting guards grew louder behind them, the pounding of their boots almost upon them. What now? Clara asked, her voice trembling as she glanced over her shoulder at the guards, who were mere seconds away from reaching them. Jack took her hand, his expression surprisingly calm despite the chaos. Trust me, he said simply. Clara nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. Together, they leaped from the vehicle into the abyss. As they fell, Clara's magic surged, enveloping them in a glowing bubble of air. The bubble cushioned their landing in the churning waters below, and they surfaced moments later, gasping for breath. Chapter 9: The Wolves and the Hidden Village. The roar of the waterfall was deafening as Jack and Clara hurtled through the misty air, clutching onto each other as Clara's magic enveloped them in a shimmering bubble of light. The crash into the river below was softened by her powers, but the strong current quickly swept them apart. Jack shouted her name, his voice drowned by the rush of the river. Clara's panicked cry echoed back before she disappeared downstream. When Clara finally clawed her way onto the muddy bank, she lay gasping for breath, her arms trembling from the effort. The forest around her was unlike any part of the deep forest they had traversed before. The air was dense, heavy with an earthy scent, and the towering trees cast long shadows in the dim light. Clara pulled herself to her feet, her clothes soaked and clinging to her. She called for Jack, her voice trembling. Only silence answered her. The eerie quiet of the forest was unnerving. As Clara took a cautious step forward, she heard a low growl. Turning, she froze as 5 wolves emerged from the shadows, their eyes gleaming like molten gold. The leader, a massive creature with a scar slashing across its snout, bared its teeth, the sound a menacing rumble that seemed to reverberate through the trees. Clara's breath hitched, and she instinctively raised her hands, her magic sparking faintly at her fingertips. When the wolves advanced, she let out a frightened cry. A burst of light shot from her palms, illuminating the forest and causing the wolves to halt momentarily, blinking against the brightness. Without wasting a second, Clara turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. Branches whipped at her face and tangled her hair as she sprinted through the underbrush. The wolves' snarls grew louder behind her, their heavy footfalls crashing through the forest. Clara's legs burned with the effort, and tears pricked her eyes as she stumbled over roots and rocks. Another burst of light flickered from her hands, disorienting the pack for a brief moment, but she knew she couldn't keep running forever. Meanwhile, Jack had pulled himself onto a rocky ledge not far from the river. His body ached, but the sharp pang of worry for Clara spurred him to action. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out for her, straining to hear anything above the rustling leaves and distant growls. Then, faint and distant, he heard her scream. "Clara!" Jack shouted, his heart racing as he plunged into the forest. He pushed through the dense foliage, dodging low-hanging branches and leaping over fallen logs. Every cry she made pulled him forward like an invisible tether, the fear in her voice slicing through him. As Jack tracked Clara's trail, he noticed faint impressions of her footsteps in the mud and broken twigs. His sharp eyes caught sight of a glowing strand of her magic lingering on a tree bark, like a faint echo of her presence. He followed it without hesitation. However, Jack's focus was interrupted by a low, guttural growl. He turned sharply to see wolves, their golden eyes glowing menacingly in the dim light, emerging from the shadows. Jack braced himself, gripping a sturdy branch he picked up along the way. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, backing away slowly as the wolves fanned out, encircling him. Their leader snarled, and the pack lunged. Jack darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the sharp teeth of the nearest wolf. "Not today," Jack yelled, swinging the branch with all his might. The wolves dodged and regrouped, their movements coordinated and relentless. One wolf leaped onto Jack, knocking him to the ground. He rolled and kicked it off, but not before another lunged, sinking its teeth into his mid-arm. Jack shouted in pain but didn't stop moving. With a surge of adrenaline, he grabbed a sharp rock from the ground and used it to defend himself. The wolves hesitated momentarily, giving Jack a chance to scramble to his feet. Panting heavily, Jack fought off the advancing wolves, his movements growing more desperate as his energy waned. Blood seeped from the bite wound on his arm, staining his torn sleeve. "Come on, Jack. Think," he muttered to himself. Spotting a fallen tree with a hollow trunk, he sprinted toward it. Using the narrow entrance as cover, Jack managed to fend off the wolves long enough to escape through the other side. The wolves snarled and snapped, but Jack, limping and clutching his wounded arm, managed to put enough distance between himself and the pack. He collapsed against a tree, breathing hard. "Clara, you better be okay," he murmured, pushing himself back to his feet despite the pain. Clara, exhausted and desperate, tripped on a hidden root and fell forward into a bush. The ground gave way beneath her, and she tumbled into darkness, landing with a soft thud on a bed of glowing moss. For a moment, all she could hear was the rapid pounding of her heart. Then, she realized the growls of the wolves had vanished. Panting, she looked around and gasped. She had fallen into an underground village, its walls and ceilings sparkling as if encrusted with starlight. Tiny homes carved into the mossy stone glowed faintly, and small figures began to emerge, their movements curious but cautious. They were the Starlings, a diminutive clan no taller than a child, their garments shimmering like the night sky. One starling, who appeared to be their leader, stepped forward. His silver beard flowed to his knees, and his deep-set eyes sparkled with a wisdom that belied his small stature. "Who enters our sanctuary?" he asked, his voice both gentle and commanding. Clara's lips trembled as she tried to speak. "I am Clara. Please, I mean no harm. I was being chased and I fell." "Clara," the leader repeated, his expression softening as murmurs rippled through the gathered starlings. "You are the one the forest has whispered of. The girl with magic. The one destined to face Helena." Clara's breath caught. "You know about Helena?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The leader nodded solemnly. "Your power is the key to breaking her tyranny and restoring peace to the realm. The forest led you here for a reason." Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the village. Jack had burst through, panting and wild-eyed. He froze when he saw the starlings, their tiny weapons gleaming as they surrounded him. One starling pointed dramatically. "He's too tall to trust." Jack raised his hands in mock surrender, his signature smirk appearing despite the situation. "Easy there, tiny warriors. I'm just here for the princess." "Jack!" Clara exclaimed, relief flooding her voice. She stepped forward, placing herself between Jack and the starlings. "He's my friend," she assured them. "He's here to help me." The leader studied Jack carefully, his sharp gaze probing. Finally, he nodded, and the tension eased. Jack approached Clara, his expression softening as he took in her disheveled state. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Clara nodded, smiling faintly. "Thanks to you." Her smile faltered as she noticed the blood seeping through Jack's sleeve. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Jack, your arm." "What happened?" Jack tried to wave her concern away with a crooked grin. "Oh, just a little disagreement with some oversized mutts. You should see the other guy." He chuckled weakly, but Clara's face crumpled with worry. "You're hurt," Clara exclaimed, her voice trembling as she stepped closer. Tears welled up in her eyes as she gently touched his injured arm. "Why didn't you say anything?" Jack's expression softened, and he shrugged with feigned nonchalance. "Didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Plus, I figured you'd be too busy saving the day." Clara shook her head, her tears spilling over as she hugged him tightly. "You're impossible, Jack," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The starling leader approached, his staff glowing faintly. "Let me see the wound," he said, his tone firm but kind. Jack hesitated, but Clara's pleading eyes convinced him to extend his arm. The leader placed his hands over the bite, and a soft, golden light emanated from his palms. The wound closed, leaving behind only faint scars. Clara let out a sigh of relief, her tears drying as she looked up at Jack with a smile. "You're okay now." Jack flexed his arm, impressed. "Not bad for a guy your size," he quipped to the leader, who gave a small, knowing smile. Clara laughed, her worry melting into gratitude. She reached for Jack's hand, holding it tightly. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. Jack's smirk returned, but his eyes were warm. "Always, Princess." The starlings, now satisfied with Jack's presence, led the pair to a gathering hall carved into the glowing stone. There they explained the Mirror Realm, a secret pathway to the real world where Clara could confront Helena. The journey would be perilous, filled with illusions and trials, but the starlings promised to guide them as far as they could. The starling leader stepped forward, his expression solemn. "Clara, there is more you need to know," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "The Mirror Realm was not just a prison, it was a place where Helena sought to hide you. She feared what you could become." Clara's brow furrowed. "Why? What does she want from me?" The leader sighed, his gaze steady. "Helena is the one who took your mother's life. She saw your birth as a threat to her rule, for even as an infant, your power was evident. Helena imprisoned you to ensure you would never rise against her. But now your magic has grown, and you are the one destined to defeat her and bring peace to this realm." The weight of his words settled over Clara like a shroud. She clenched her fists, her eyes shining with a mix of sorrow and resolve. "Helena took everything from me," she whispered. "But she won't take anything more." Jack, seated beside her, gently took her hand in his. His grip was steady, a silent show of support for her loss. Beside her, watched her expression shift and felt a pang of admiration. Despite everything she had endured, she remained resolute. Later that evening, starlings gathered around the glowing pool, their faint chatter harmonizing with the soothing hum of the village. Jack and Clara sat by the edge, the shimmering light reflecting their emotions, a mixture of determination and the unspoken bond they now shared. Clara gazed at the water, her reflection rippling as she spoke softly. "You know, when I was trapped in the castle, I used to dream about what it would feel like to be free. But I never imagined it would be like this, dangerous, unpredictable, and with you." Jack tilted his head, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Dangerous and unpredictable? You really know how to flatter a guy, Princess." Clara rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. "You know what I mean, Jack. I thought I'd be scared out here, and sometimes I am. But you make it easier." Jack leaned back, propping himself up on his elbows. "Well, I'm glad to know my endless charm and dashing good looks have made this life-threatening adventure slightly less terrifying for you." Clara laughed, the sound light and genuine, cutting through the tension of their situation. "You're impossible." "Impossible is my middle name," Jack quipped, then softened as he caught the warmth in her gaze. "But seriously, Clara, you're stronger than you think. I've seen it. You're not just surviving this, you're leading us through it." Her expression grew thoughtful. "I'm trying, but I wouldn't have made it this far without you. You've risked everything to help me, Jack." "Why?" Jack hesitated, the playful mask slipping for a moment. "Because," he began, his voice quieter. "Because you're worth it, Clara. You believe in people in a way I never thought possible. Being around you, it makes me want to be someone better." Clara's eyes softened and she reached out, her fingers lightly brushing his. "You already are, Jack. And I trust you completely." The sincerity in her voice made Jack's chest tighten. He gave her a lopsided grin, but his voice carried an unfamiliar seriousness. "That means more than you know." The starlings interrupted the moment as they approached their glowing staffs, signaling that preparations were complete. The leader bowed slightly. "Clara, Jack, the path to the Mirror Realm awaits. The journey will test you both, but your bond will be your greatest strength." Clara rose, her hand still in Jack's, and nodded with quiet determination. "We're ready." As they followed the starlings into the dimly lit tunnels leading toward the Mirror Realm, Clara glanced at Jack. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, a silent promise that they would face whatever lay ahead, together. Chapter 10: The Mirror Trials. The air shimmered with a silvery haze as Jack and Clara stood at the entrance to the Mirror Realm. Portal behind them flickered and closed, sealing them in. They exchanged a glance, a mix of determination and unease mirrored in their expressions. "This is it," Jack said, gripping the hilt of his dagger. "Ready," Clara nodded, though the weight of the starling's revelation still lingered in her mind. Her mother's death at Queen Helena's hands and her own destiny to defeat the tyrant felt overwhelming. Jack noticed her hesitation and reached for her hand, his voice softening. "Hey, we've got this. Together." The gesture steadied her and Clara straightened. Let's go. As they moved forward, the mirror realm stretched endlessly in all directions. Reflections surrounded them, of themselves, distorted landscapes, and even phantom-like figures that flickered in and out of sight. First challenge came swiftly. A maze of mirrors materialized, each passage identical to the last. Jack's confident smirk faltered as they retraced their steps for the third time. "This place is messing with my head," he muttered. "Any chance your magic can point the way?" Clara closed her eyes, summoning the light within her. Her fingertips glowed faintly, and an orb of golden light formed in her palm. She released it, and the orb floated ahead, casting a warm glow that dispelled the maze's illusions. The walls shimmered and dissolved, revealing the true path forward. "Nice work," Jack said, flashing a grin. "I knew you'd come in handy." They continued, but the realm's challenges only grew more intense. The air grew colder, and a thick mist enveloped them. From the fog emerged a figure, a woman with flowing hair and a kind, familiar face. Clara froze. It was her mother. "Clara," the apparition said, her voice tender. "You shouldn't be here. You're not strong enough to face Helena." Clara's breath hitched. Tears welled in her eyes as doubt clawed at her heart. "Mother!" Jack stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and the vision. "That's not real," he said firmly. "Don't listen to it." The apparition's kind face twisted into a sneer. "You'll fail, Clara. Just like you failed to save me." Clara's light flickered, dimming under the weight of her despair. Jack grabbed her shoulders, his gaze steady. "Clara, look at me. This isn't your fault. None of it is. You're stronger than this illusion, and you're stronger than Helena." Clara's eyes met his, and the warmth in his voice reignited her courage. Her light flared, banishing the apparition in a burst of gold. She took a deep, steadying breath. "Thank you." "Any time," Jack said, his tone light but his expression serious. "Now let's keep moving." As they pressed on, it was Jack's turn to face his past. A mirror ahead showed a younger version of himself, a boy with ragged clothes and hungry eyes, clutching a stolen loaf of bread. The scene shifted, showing a mob of angry villagers chasing the boy. The adult Jack's confident demeanor cracked as he stared at the reflection. "I was just trying to survive," he murmured. Clara stepped beside him, her light dispelling the painful memory. "That doesn't define who you are now," she said gently. "You've proven yourself brave and kind. Don't let the past hold you back." Her words steadied him, and he nodded. Together they moved forward. Their final challenge came in the form of Vespera, the guardian spirit of the mirror realm. Her form was ethereal, her eyes glowing with otherworldly light as she appeared before them. "You have no place here," she said, her voice echoing like a chorus. "Turn back or be lost in the maze of mirrors forever." Jack stepped forward, his stance defiant. "Sorry, but we're not going anywhere until we get what we came for." Vespera's eyes narrowed, and the realm around them shifted. The ground beneath their feet fractured into countless reflective shards, forming a maze of false paths and illusions. Jack and Clara became separated, each facing their own set of traps. Clara navigated her portion of the maze using her magic, her light revealing true paths and dispelling illusions. Jack relied on his wits and agility, dodging falling shards and figuring out the hidden patterns in the mirrors. Despite the separation, their bond remained strong. Clara's light eventually reached Jack, guiding him back to her side. Reunited, they confronted Vespera together. "We're not here to fight you," Clara said, her voice steady. "We're here to end Helena's reign. Don't you want freedom from her control?" Vespera hesitated, the glow in her eyes dimming. "Freedom," she echoed, her voice softening. Jack seized the moment. "Helena's using you to keep Clara trapped. Help us and you'll be free too." The spirit's form flickered, her resolve wavering. Finally, she stepped aside, the maze dissolving into a single path leading forward. "Go," she said. But beware, Helena will not let you pass easily. Jack and Clara exchanged a glance, gratitude and determination reflected in their eyes. They stepped through the final portal, leaving the mirror realm behind and entering the threshold of their ultimate challenge. The mirror trials had tested their strength, courage, and trust in each other. As they emerged from the realm, Clara's light burned brighter than ever, and Jack's confidence had grown unshakable. Together, they were ready to face Queen Helena and reclaim Clara's destiny. The kingdom's fate now rested in their hands. Chapter 11: The Final Stand. Dark clouds churned overhead as Clara and Jack stepped through the final mirror, emerging onto the precipice of Queen Helena's lair. Before them loomed the Castle of Mirrors in its full, menacing glory. Jagged spires reached skyward, and the air crackled with an unnatural energy. Shadows writhed along the ground, converging into the shapes of Helena's dark warriors, who guarded the entrance with glowing red eyes. Jack glanced at Clara, who stared resolutely ahead despite the flicker of fear in her eyes. "Well," Jack said, unsheathing his dagger, "at least she's consistent with the creepy vibe." Clara managed a faint smile, the warmth of Jack's humor steadying her. She raised her hands, and a soft golden light emanated from her palms, casting away the immediate darkness. "Let's finish this," she said. The two crept closer, using the shifting shadows as cover. Jack's nimble steps were nearly silent, but Clara's magic flickered faintly with each stride. One of the shadowy guards tilted its head, alerted to their presence. Without hesitation, Jack lunged forward, striking the creature with precision. Dissolved into wisps of smoke, but the commotion alerted the others. A dozen pairs of glowing eyes turned toward them. "So much for sneaking in," Jack muttered. "Time for Plan B." "What's Plan B?" Clara asked, her voice tinged with urgency. "We run!" Jack shouted, grabbing her hand. Two sprinted toward the castle gates as the dark warriors swarmed. Clara hurled bursts of light, her magic scattering the creatures like leaves in the wind. Jack, meanwhile, darted and dodged, occasionally taking down a straggler with his dagger. The gates loomed closer, but the minions closed in. Clara turned, her light flaring brighter. "Jack, go. I'll hold them off." "Not a chance," Jack said, spinning back to her side. "We're doing this together." Summoning all her strength, Clara unleashed a wave of light that pushed the dark warriors back just long enough for Jack to kick open the heavy wooden doors. Together they slipped inside, slamming the gates shut behind them. The throne room of Queen Helena's castle was a study in dark opulence. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting endless distorted versions of Jack and Clara as they entered. Helena sat upon a high throne, her presence commanding and cold. Her black gown shimmered with threads of shadow, and her crown gleamed like frost. "Ah, my dear niece," Helena said, her voice a silky purr. "And the thief." "How quaint." Clara stepped forward, her light casting a golden glow that pushed back the oppressive darkness. "It ends here, Helena. You've taken enough from this kingdom, from my family. I won't let you hurt anyone else." Helena laughed, a sound that echoed unnaturally through the chamber. "You think a few tricks of light will stop me? You are as naive as your mother." Her smile sharpened. "Ah, yes. I see her in you. Weak. Foolish. Unable to protect herself or anyone else." Helena's lips curled into a cruel smile as she shifted her gaze to Clara. "Did he tell you who he really is?" she sneered, her voice dripping with malice. "Your precious companion is nothing but a thief, a liar who has spent his life taking what doesn't belong to him." Clara's steps faltered, her golden light dimming. "Is it true, Jack?" she asked, her voice trembling. Pain in her eyes cut deeper than any weapon. Jack turned to her, his face pale. "Clara, it's not what you think. Yes, I was a thief, but I've changed. I swear, everything I've done since meeting you has been for us, for the kingdom." Helena laughed, her voice echoing like a cold wind. "Do you really believe him, Clara? A thief's words are as worthless as the treasures he steals." You're a fool if you trust him. Clara hesitated, doubt clouding her heart. But then, memories of their journey together surged through her, Jack's unwavering courage, his humor that had brightened her darkest moments, and the countless times he had risked his life for her. She remembered the warmth in his eyes, the kindness in his actions, and the trust they had built. No, Clara said, her voice steady as her light flared brighter. You're wrong, Helena. Jack may have made mistakes, but he's proven who he really is, a loyal, brave, and kind person. And I trust him. Jack's eyes widened, gratitude and relief washing over him. Clara! She turned to him, her hand reaching for his. We stand together, Jack. Always. Helena's smug expression faltered, her composure cracking as Clara's light intensified. The bond between Clara and Jack became a force she couldn't break, and for the first time, doubt flickered in the Queen's eyes. Helena's eyes narrowed. Touching, she sneered. With a flick of her wrist, the mirrors around them shimmered and burst forth with shadowy figures. Helena's dark warriors surged toward them. Jack turned to Clara. You handle the Queen. I'll take care of these guys. Clara hesitated. But... Go, Jack said, flashing her a reassuring grin. I've got this. With a reluctant nod, Clara turned her focus to Helena, who rose from her throne, shadows curling around her like living serpents. Jack dove into the fray, weaving between the dark warriors with his usual quick-footed agility. Honestly, he quipped, dodging a swipe, how many of you does it take to stop one guy? One shadowy figure lunged, but Jack rolled beneath its attack, slashing with his dagger. Creature dissolved into smoke. Another cornered him, but Jack vaulted over a fallen pillar, grinning. Too slow. Meanwhile, Clara faced Helena, their powers colliding in a dazzling display. Helena hurled dark energy, but Clara countered with bursts of radiant light. Clash shook the room, mirrors shattering and shards raining down like glittering snow. You can't win, Helena hissed, her voice filled with venom. Your power is nothing compared to mine. Clara's light faltered, her fear threatening to overwhelm her. But then she remembered Jack's words and the unwavering faith in his eyes. She steadied herself and took a deep breath. You're wrong, she said, her voice firm. My power comes from love and hope, things you'll never understand. Her light intensified, driving Helena back. Golden tendrils of magic spiraled outward, wrapping around Helena's dark energy and shattering it. Helena screamed, her form flickering as the shadows consumed her. As Helena's power waned, the castle began to collapse around them. The walls cracked, and the ground trembled as if the very foundation rejected her darkness. Jack, battered but determined, sprinted to Clara's side, urgency in his voice. Time to go, he shouted, grabbing her hand firmly. Two raced through the crumbling halls, their breaths quick and hearts beating as one. Around them, the castle groaned and shuddered, sending fragments of stone tumbling from above. They dodged falling debris, leaped over widening chasms, and navigated the chaos with Clara's glowing magic lighting the path ahead. As they neared the grand gates, a massive beam came crashing down, blocking their exit. For a moment, it seemed like the end, but Clara squared her shoulders, determination flashing in her eyes. She stepped forward and raised her hands, summoning all her remaining strength. A golden light burst forth, brilliant and dazzling, reducing the obstacle to shimmering dust. Jack whistled in admiration, his grin cutting through the tension. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Clara managed a brief smile despite the chaos. Together, they surged forward, bursting through the gates just as the castle collapsed entirely behind them. The deafening sound of shattering stone and Helena's final scream echoed through the air, fading into silence as they tumbled onto the grass outside. For a long moment, they lay side by side, dust-covered and breathless, the weight of their victory sinking in. Slowly, the dark clouds that had loomed over the castle began to part, and sunlight poured down, warm and golden. The oppressive energy lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Back in the village, the townspeople gathered, their faces filled with awe and gratitude as Clara and Jack returned. The starlings appeared, their shimmering forms glowing brighter than ever. "You did it," the starling leader said, bowing deeply. "The kingdom is free, thanks to you both." Clara looked around at the joyful faces, her heart swelling with pride and relief. She turned to Jack. "I couldn't have done it without you." Jack shrugged, a playful smile on his lips. "I'll admit I'm pretty great in a crisis." Clara laughed, then grew serious. "You're more than that, Jack. You're brave, kind, and you've been my rock through all of this. Thank you." For once, Jack was at a loss for words. He rubbed the back of his neck, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "Any time, Princess." The celebration that followed was a grand affair. The villagers, starlings, and magical creatures danced and sang beneath the stars. Clara was crowned queen in a ceremony filled with light and joy, her golden magic illuminating the night. Beside her, Jack was crowned king, his roguish charm earning the cheers and adoration of the crowd. Together, they stood as a symbol of unity and hope for the kingdom. As the festivities wound down, Clara and Jack found a quiet spot away from the crowd. They sat side by side, gazing at the stars. Two sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their journey lifting as hope filled the air. The kingdom's future was bright, and so was theirs, together. Happily ever after. Subscribe to SeasOcean and hit the bell icon so you never miss our new upcoming audiobooks.